Earlier this year, Pat McDonald of HollywoodChicago.com, we did a thing that we are becoming famous for, internet famous for, at least
Oh,
in,
sure.
in the sphere of kicking the seat, where we talk about a movie that is hard to find.
Yes.
It's like a kind of a cult, an older film, and we lament the fact on the show that we had to buy a $50 DVD or find it on YouTube or bootleg it or something because there's no solid home video release for it. And that the
Right.
movie this time we're talking about was Watermelon Man, 1970, from Melvin Van Peebles.
Right.
And wouldn't you know it, last month, I think, Criterion came out with a box set of Melvin Van Peebles' essential films. In fact, this is what it is. It's Melvin Van Peebles' essential
Oh, very
films.
cool.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So now it's got a proper release, and it's got like a documentary on it and an introduction from like 2004. Melvin Van Peebles passed away a couple months ago.
Right.
And when we were talking about Watermelon Man, we talked about, Melvin Van Peebles he was like the inspiration for a lot of, Blaxploitation cinema, or what would become known as that. And the follow-up to Watermelon Man, which was a successful movie, he took what he made from that and went and made this independent movie called SWEETBACK'S BAADASSSSS Song, which is what we're talking about today. And that's also part of this collection. I'm very excited to talk about this.
I'm glad you said it.
Yeah. it's weird because I didn't
We can just refer to it as Sweetback from now on.
Yeah. Sweetback or Sweetback. But yeah, it's like there's 2 A's in bad, and then like a whole bunch. I think there's like 5 A's or S's in badass. It's wonderful. It's fun to say. But
yeah, it is. And it's one of the great movie titles of all time, and as far as I'm concerned.
Now, had you seen this before we were doing our homework to talk about it today?
Nope. I saw it for the first time this morning.
I got to ask you. So it came out in 1971.
Right. 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's 50. Oh, I feel so old.
I know.
Oh my God.
And think about a movie. Think about this. When that movie came out 50 years before, it was 1921. It was a silent film. I mean, I always put it in that context. When something turns 50, I said, well, when I was a kid, what was 50 years ago? Oh, Casablanca or something like that. Or Casablanca, the 90s was its 50th anniversary. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because, talking about the 20s, I was also, the dawn of an influential era. And that's what we're seeing with Sweetback. It is down and dirty, wholly independent production. One of the things that's on this disc is they had the audio commentary from Van Peebles from 1997. I listened to part of it, and just him talking about the production and how kind of rough and, fly by the seat of their pants it was. It's fascinating. Well, and you see all that in the film.
His son, Mario, made a film about the making of the film. That's how interesting the stories were.
Yeah, and that documentary is actually included. It's a 2-disc thing, and that's the other disc. So I still have to. It came out in 2013. It was called Badass. Right?
Yeah.
Did you see that? Did you watch that when it came out?
I haven't. I actually talked to Mario Van Peebles about another film he did. I can't remember which, but we actually talked a little about that. And of course, he's famously in Sweetback as the child who lays on a lady, a working gal, as they say.
Let's begin at the beginning.
Yes, quite shocking, I have to say.
I was telling my wife this because initially I had suggested that we watch this movie together because she hasn't seen a lot of Blaxploitation, and I'm still relatively young in my education, but I love it.
So do I.
Yeah. But I'm kind of glad that we didn't, because our schedules didn't work out, because I'm watching this. My jaw is on the floor during this 4-minute or 5-minute sex scene between a 13-year-old fully naked Mario Van Peebles and this other actress who's playing a prostitute that he fulfills her to a screaming orgasm. As they cut back and forth between like adult Sweetback and young Sweetback. It's astonishing, and it's something that I'm glad Criterion is putting this out today, but I feel like if anybody got a whiff of what's in this opening 5 minutes, it's one of those things that would be like canceled or talked about, or like, oh my God, can this even be shown today?
Well, on Wikipedia, they said in the UK they blur out certain elements of it because of their strict pedophilia laws. So,
And it's weird
uh,
because this is the director's son.
yes. Well, I mean, and I actually there was some excerpts from a very good debate about this film on Wiki, and it said that the kid was 10. I saw him as a teenager, like a
Well,
young teenager, but a teenager.
well, I was looking at the dates, and I can't do the math right now, but he might have been 10 when maybe he was 10 when they filmed it, and then it came out when he was 13. But like if you look at 1971 and you take 13 or 14 years back, that's Mario Van Peebles' birthday. So he does look really young.
Yeah, I'm just saying. My assumption was he was a younger, like how a 13-year-old looks. They could look like they're 5, and they could look like they're 20, depending on what happens. So, but yeah, I mean, you want to talk about a shocking opening, and I'd heard about it for years, but I don't think I was even prepared for the shock. I was fascinated by it because I'm like, that's as outrageous as possibly anything I've seen on film.
The closest I can recall, and this is possibly the last time I was truly like shocked and uncomfortable, was in 1995 with Larry Clark's Kids.
Oh yeah.
But even that, you could argue it was like two teenagers together, because it doesn't make it any less like skeevy, but there's just something so audacious because the way that they film it, and Van Peebles talks about this a bit in the audio commentary.
Mm-hmm.
The DP of the film, he found him because Van Peebles is a big fan of his work in porn. So he described it several times as, yeah, we're making a porno movie. It's not outright porno. There's a lot of sex in it, but there's also a story and like social commentary and stuff. But it is, very raw. And that's the thing, is I was bothered by the time when I was watching. I was like, I don't know if I want to finish this movie. But by the time I finished the film, I was like, I get it. It's still kind of wrong, but I understand what he was doing with this movie, and just like making a bold, dangerous statement with a lot of what he's talking about here.
And I totally agree with that. I was mesmerized by the audacity of it. Let me say that. And I would have to also say that we see Van Peebles' point of view in this, and I think he has some really wrong-headed notions about women and homosexuals and hippies, and the things that really the man, as he likes to call him, and I like to call him the man too. He's properly flayed. He deserves it. But some of the people in there, or the groups in there, kind of are undeserving of it. But again, it's a different era, a different time. We can't expect everything and everybody to be to the standards of our times.
Yeah.
But we have to look at it and say, that's not right. And we'll move on, and we'll talk about the movie in that context afterward.
Well, there is one thing that I want to mention on that note, is the commentary that he does for this from 97. He talks about that opening scene, and because as the scene concludes, it cuts from young Sweetback to old Sweetback. So it kind of dissolves or whatever. Maybe there's cutaway and cut back. It's no longer the little kid. It's the adult Melvin Van Peebles between this woman's legs. And he was laughing during the commentary, saying that during that, as he was doing that scene, the director or the co-director or someone came in and said, we ran out of film like a few minutes ago. And he was like, just, can't you see what I'm doing? I'm like, wow. And that's just something that, again, you would not admit to today, but that was only 20 years ago.
Right. Well, I'll say one thing too, that I wrote down Citizen Kane because when Kane came in and broke all the rules, the filmistas, the cinematees of the era, realized what he was doing. But the general public, not so movie oriented in those days. It was purely entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
This is another example of somebody really coming in, making his own way, breaking the rules, and creating a new language
Yeah.
that filmmakers can use going forward. And that was one of the most impressive things about this film. I was like, wow, he's just not even following any convention. You can't even really say there's a plot except the guy is running away from something. And, you know, historically, there's a lot of precedent in it, of course, slavery being number one. But yeah, it was, it really broke the rules that were necessary to be broken, and also create a new language for filmmakers to use afterwards. So very impressive.
And that's, you know, I think without those kind of innovations, the movie would just be kind of flat, because you're right, there's not really a story here. I think the message is greater than the story, in that Sweetback is this kind of, you know, street figure. He's known by everybody. He's a tough guy. He gets kind of dragged along by the cops. And if I have this correctly, he's in the cop car when they get another call to go, you know, kind of arrest this Black Panther kid. And they go rough him up, you know, by these oil derricks. And Sweetback is just kind of like watching by the side as the cops beat the crap out of this kid. He takes his handcuffs and creates them, you know, makes them into knuckles essentially, and beats the cops within an inch of their life. I thought that he had killed them, but they were just, you know, hospitalized. This begins a citywide, like countryside wide manhunt for Sweetback. And he has all these encounters with people on this sort of like this underground system as he makes his way to freedom in Mexico.
Underground railroads, slavery. I mean, the police were invented to be slave hunters. I mean,
well, I mean, that's a whole other conversation, because law enforcement, the notion
is historically correct,
right? But the notion of law enforcement did not start with like white people hunting slaves. I mean, people historically,
the organized system of law enforcement began as a way to hunt down runaway slaves and bring them back to their people.
I'm just saying Roman soldiers might have an argument to that.
Well, I'm not talking about military. I'm talking about a separate American law enforcement. I'm talking about the history of America. I'm talking about, you know, the era of slavery.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that is
military
relevant.
has always been law enforcement. That's the whole definition of military.
Yeah. So, but you know, needing something localized. Yes. As with a lot of stuff in America, it has terrible roots that evolved into something that was more practical, still with its problems. You know, right. So I'm not saying I would not want to live in a modern society without cops. So
well, I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying that this is the roots of police
yes,
and law enforcement.
And I understand. I think he might have been, I don't know how conscious of that he was when he was making the film, because there was a lot of imagery of the kind of the runaway slave, particularly in the climax when he's you know, trying to make the run for Mexico. He's got the two you know, hunters with the dogs, and it's kind of funny because they get into a squabble over the dogs, and they lose sight of him, and one of those dogs doesn't end up so well.
Yeah, that was shocking too.
Was that the effects in that last scene where we see a dead dog were so convincing that I wondered, did he go so underground that he killed a fucking dog to make this happen?
No. I would assume he would have called some shelters or something that they euthanize and said, "Can we have a dead dog carcass?" I would hope. I don't know.
I don't know, but it was very convincing.
It was shocking. It was totally shocking. And again, it was the oppressor. The oppressed has become the oppressor, or the oppressed has finally started to defend himself. I mean, the whole element, all the elements in this, what he goes through is almost a journey of the history of the black man in America. And it begins with the exploitation of law enforcement over the dominion of his soul, in a sense. And that's what made it powerful too. Like you said, as a movie, it's more symbolic and more the message is stronger than the narrative.
Yeah, and I think because at the end of it, there's such a big manhunt out for this guy who,
Yeah.
yes, he beat a couple of cops. And as far as anybody knows, it was just, a black criminal who, got the better of two, upstanding law abiding, police officers.
Yeah.
But you wonder, was all of this time and energy and expenditure and resources necessary just to find one guy? And then you start to think, well, this is, just post 1964, race relations are not, kumbaya by any stretch of the imagination. You can almost see it as the sort of the white institution saying,
Yeah.
we are not going to stand any indignity.
The state,
We're going to
the
squash
state
this like a bug.
has to maintain white supremacy, and the only way they maintain white supremacy is to make an example
Yes.
of those who go against the man. And basically, Sweetback was going against the man. So good luck, sir.
Yeah. So that's one of the cool things about this movie is you can look at it as that very much that time capsule of he opens up the film by saying, what was the quote here? This is a hymn from the mouth of reality, kind of casting it in more of a spiritual collective sense. It says, Sweetback's Badass Song starring the Black community. I mean,
right.
Even before the sex stuff,
significant.
it's very audacious. It's like a big statement. Like this is a thesis.
The critical essay, and I would just tell you to go on Wikipedia and read the whole thing, because two very interesting and I think valid points of view. But what the one that was negative was like he was creating a circumstance of the community that wasn't necessarily rooted in the socioeconomic problems that Black Americans were having at the time. So we, as fantastical as the community is, the definition of community, the context of community in Van Peebles' point of view is very significant as to what the meaning of the film is.
Well, I mean,
I thought that was a completely valid point.
It is interesting because it's not like if you look at like Watermelon Man, which dealt with like the white prejudicial kind of suburban community, right? It's not like it was a story about a criminal gangster who, white guy who turns black. Sweetback is a criminal, and his element very much is these underground kind of like, sex shows. He's not just, the average, black dad living in the suburbs or living on an apartment block, right? So it is kind of weird to say this is the Black community, this is representative of it. It's not a flattering portrait, but on the other hand, his statement or his idea is to present the world as he knows it, as his authentic to his truth and the people that he knows, and those are the people that helped to make this movie. So I'm not one to say, well, this is inauthentic or this is not a good representation. It's a representation that's honest about a certain segment.
Well, a certain level. That's what I'm saying.
Right,
a certain level. Not he doesn't deviate from that level, and then that's fine. Again, that's his point of view. That's why we have to look at the stereotypical gaze and the questionable use of women, both white and black in the film. So again, we're looking at it differently as we do through our prism of experience. So and I don't want to be indelicate about this question, but I'm curious because given that your father was black, when you see films like this, when you see things about how the race was put down historically, and then fighting back in art as Van Peebles is doing, does it? I don't know. Does it pique your curiosity about that portion of your DNA, if you will? I mean, your heritage within that legacy, I guess, is a better way of putting it. Or maybe it's a worse way. I don't fucking know. Excuse me, I didn't mean to say it. F on me.
I was the first to drop the F-bomb, I
Ah!
think. So don't worry about it. No, it's an interesting question because you know, my dad was black, my mom is white. You know, my dad passed away a number of years ago. But and I think we've talked about this before when the subject of race has come up. He was very
Yes.
much, you know, he was a 60s, 70s, you know, kind of, you know, radical guy, but then he settled into more, this is going to sound weird for all sorts of reasons, but he was more of a Cosby 80s black guy in that like the struggle is over, right? I mean,
Wow.
there's equality under the law. That's not to say that there are not significant problems that need to be overcome. I mean,
Right.
to listen to Van Peebles talk in the 97 commentary about like, I don't think things have changed much. I'm like, well, but then you got to think that was also 25 years ago, and it was 5 years after Rodney King. So it's a constantly evolving, you know, situation. So all I know is when I was growing up, what he taught me about like the 60s and the 70s. And before that, the kind of the struggle for civil rights and then trying to settle into a newly integrated America and what that meant. But he was always very forward thinking. He was never, you know, against the white man, against the man. He was just like, you know, do your business, take care of your family, you know, move forward. Don't, you know, worry, you know, to borrow a term from Scott Adams, don't get lost in loser think, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why I have a very kind of complicated relationship with a lot of this stuff. I'm able to separate it. I love Blaxploitation because I like the kind of the artistic anti-hero portrayals of them. But when you ask me like, you know, yeah, isn't it great that they're standing up against the white man? I'm like, sure, maybe back then, but I'm not saying that this is anything that you need to carry forward into the 21st century.
I think George Floyd et al. Would disagree, but
that's a whole other conversation.
well, I mean, no, I mean, in the context of what you're saying, we have a really bad problem right now. I think with people, especially in white communities, and I'm not even talking about the hard right wing, you know, conservative white supremacists. I'm talking about it. I'm talking about ordinary people who are feeling like marginalized because the society is giving more attention to black culture or paying attention in the sense of why are we killing these people, you know.
Well, I mean, I understand that perspective, but I think that is a perspective that is held by people that is not necessarily true. I think that is a perspective that's held by a marginal.
I'm sorry. I have relatives that are, you know, daily as pumpkin pie, and their opinions about race are, for one thing, I as a white man don't think I should pontificate about race. I don't think you can unless you live that stuff. I think it's impossible to know what it's about. I really do.
Right. But I mean, I think there's also another side of that narrative, which is it's weird to presume that every person who's black or a person of color has the same experience of being oppressed or experiencing some kind of discrimination. I mean, you can certainly be a white person living in, say, a different part of the world or even in America and experiencing discrimination. And that's not even to say that racism exclusively is a problem with white people. I mean, there are plenty of people of all ethnicities who have, you know, problems with race. But, you know, if you want to talk to me about like the percentage of people that are openly racist today versus the ones who are openly racist in like the time that this movie was made, yeah, it's not even comparable.
Well, now, no, I would agree with that, but I also agree that people are feeling like they're losing their America because it's not a white supremacist America anymore.
I understand that point of view, but I also think that is an oversimplification based on misinformation because not for a larger percentage of the people that have that point of view are the marginalized, very small, insignificant portion of people.
They elect presidents, dude. They elected a racist president.
This is going into a completely different direction because you could also say, well, They also elected a black president. They diselected the last president, the racist president, as you call him. So the narrative doesn't quite work. Like, it's great when you've got the guy that you don't like in office and say, well, this is because a whole bunch of racists came out and we're a horribly racist, backwards country. And then when the guy that you do like gets into office, like, things are great again, but we still have a terrible problem with racism in the country.
I'm not saying things are great again. I'm simply saying that it scares me that we live in a country that would elect somebody like Donald Trump. It scares me. That's all. I mean, yeah, well, we got through it this time. We got old man Biden in now, genial Uncle Joe. But the point is, too, he's somewhat of a generation that is, you know, lived most of his life in a kind of white supremacist world. I don't know. There are no answers on this. Really, there are no answers. I don't want to get into a pissing match about this because it's not worth it. I want to talk about the movie, but the movie has this context in it, and I can't help but think.
No, and it's great to bring it up because I think this is. I asked why Criterion would put this this movie out, but I think it's because it's part of a larger body of work and also a larger film. Like that, the opening scene that we spent so much time talking about, it is shocking, but it is not the entire movie. There's so many reasons to watch Sweetback and talk about it in the context of 2021 and what this has meant for movies. Something else that shocked me was there's a great scene where Sweetback is running through a viaduct. This is all takes place in California. There's a viaduct that looked almost like they shot at the same place that they shot Terminator 2, the scene where the semi truck comes over and almost runs over John Connor.
And Grease.
Oh, right. Well, but that scene, I don't know where if they just had someone on an overpass or I don't think it was a crane because this is like a super indie production, but it was so smooth and such a beautiful long shot that I'm like, this looks like slick Hollywood production, but it's a guy making a movie with his friends essentially.
Well, I think, and again, that's part of the innovation of the film. It's an innovative film. It is a crossover film that things were different after he projected what he projected onto the screen, and it's still going on. I mean, I think one of the things about the digital world that fascinates me so much is that it's created a new form of storytelling, especially, for example, in documentary, because where before, if you didn't have the archival footage, well, you could do a recreation. Well, that's awkward. Now they're doing animation. They're making pictures come alive. It's just technology needs to be used to advance art, and that's what he's doing in this film for sure.
Yeah, and especially in that last stretch where the narrative elements, there's not a whole lot to it. He's just on the run, but the movie seems to sort of break down and go really abstract as Sweetback himself. He's on the run. He's tired. He's hungry. He's thirsty. He's been wounded, and everything gets really shaky. You start hearing this, his song kind of being sung by this like almost like a kid's choir,
Wow.
and kind of broken up in pieces.
The music in it is crazy,
right? But I'm a big fan of movies that reflect, like the form of it reflects what's going on in the story, and that's what was so cool to see about this. And like, this is getting really weird and off the rails, but that's because the main character is delirious and probably possibly on the verge of death.
Well, and just again, what fascinated me about his on the run aspect is that it does kind of mirror the historical elements of a slave on the run, and the underground. We were talking about the Underground Railroad, but his underground society that helps him through, and him becoming a legend within that underground society. So much so that he's going to get a pass wherever he's going to complete his journey. What about the ending? I don't think it's a spoiler alert to say he does get away, and then they put a little warning on it. So he doesn't seem like a type of character that's going to seek retribution, but the final card says that he's going to come and get you, or I'm sorry, did you write that down? I didn't write it down, but it's
Let me
very
see if I might have.
very aggressive. Let me put it that way.
No, yeah.
He's gonna
I did
return to collect some dues.
I did write it down. I can't say it. I'll say, watch out, a badass N-word is coming to collect some dues.
Right.
Um,
Collect some dues. Now,
right.
his character was such that he doesn't seem like the type of person that is going to seek retribution. He does beat up the cops and everything, but that's right in front of his face. Who
Yeah.
is he exactly coming back for? You know, because the prostitution thing, like Richard Pryor, he grew up in a brothel, and obviously that's going to affect your worldview and your the way that you approach life.
Mhm.
And so we can say that he is, you know, kind of damaged goods, and you know, and Van Peebles was not afraid to say, hey, this guy came from some circumstance. I mean, he was in the beginning, wasn't he just a sort of like a performer for an audience? Like
Yeah, in these sex shows, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So
and it's interesting because one of the other things in that commentary, Van Peebles is saying that, you know, throughout the decades, people would come up to him and say how much they love Sweetback and how much he loved when he was like, when his character said this or when his character said that. And he's like, my character, he had 6 lines in the entire movie. Like, people ascribe, because of what the character represented and what his character, quote unquote, said about the environment and the times, they think that he had all these great monologues and things to say, but he was speaking through his actions and what he represented more than, you know, dialogue, because he is like a Silent Bob type of character.
yeah,
When you ask, you know, the retribution or, you know, coming back to get you, I don't know if that's so much him as much as the symbol. Like, it's like a wake up call to the people in the audience who, because one of the other parts of the opening crawl or the opening title card was, you know, this is for all the brothers and sisters who are fed up with the man. So at
yeah.
the end, they're kind of saying, yeah, I was hunted and shot and beat up and chased through the desert by hounds, but I made it to the other side. So can you.
Hmm. But that's not collecting some dues. Is that the dues he's collecting?
No, I think when you say he, I mean, I think just as the symbol, like the people like
Oh,
in the
well,
audience kind of like rising up and kind of, you know, finding their own power to come collect their dues, to get what is rightfully theirs, even if what is rightfully theirs is just, you know, the dignity of, you know, surviving this system.
that's interesting.
Um,
Again, I was more specific to the character, and my point was that the character, as he was presented, didn't strike me as the kind of person that needed retribution so much as more of it's just to escape. You
Right, but
know,
I think, but to your point, you're the one who brought this up earlier in the show. All of the imagery about the slave on the run. I think that, you know, Sweetback, we're not necessarily meant to identify with him as a character, as opposed to the character of a people. So when he's talking about, you're absolutely right. He's not, and I think that's part of the thing is he is such a he's like a human cipher. Like, you're supposed to, you know, put your feelings, your anxiety, your hopes, your passions for what this character is supposed to be into him and kind of follow him along in this journey. At the end, that's you've escaped. You're going to come back and get what's yours, because Sweetback, he is kind of a non-entity if you look at him outside of any other context.
well, besides the underage sex scene, one of the things I wanted to bring up was the odd scene in which I want to get this guy's name right. Beetle. Beetle is like the head of the sex show.
Yes.
So, but there's a very odd scene where Sweetback comes into his lair and we see him do his toilet. We see him get out of the shower. We see him sit on the john. We see him wipe himself. And we see him, you know, get ready for the day while he's talking to Sweetback.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like sitting there and I'm like, really, what is the point of his actions vis-a-vis their conversation, et cetera, et cetera? And then, you know, Beetle ends up, you know, in the interrogation room with a gun to his head, basically them asking where Sweetback is, and they render him without hearing
Mm-hmm.
because they shoot the gun right next to his ear. So there's something about Beetle that is another symbolism of the Black experience, or the experiences of people as doing ordinary things that we all do every day, but we just don't put a video camera on them, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, that's just a real fascinating use of character, I thought.
I do too. I
Both
love.
both in his losing the hearing scene and the and identifying it, the body at the morgue is a Sweetback, et cetera, et cetera. So the Beetle goes through a thing as much as Sweetback does, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great character. Another
Yeah,
anecdote I found out was the sound editor called Melvin Van Peebles in a panic because he thought something had happened to the sound mix from the day that they shot that scene. And it because he's like, this guy, I can't understand a word he's saying. Everything got all garbled. He's like, no, that's just the way he talks.
yeah,
Because he's speaking in this like really fast kind of
yeah,
like, jive thing. And it's,
yeah.
there's
I
beautiful.
just, the context of the scene was telling the story, but there are times where I'm like, no, I'm not going to rewind this. I'll just move on. Uh,
But there's two
Another
key.
story, a quick story that I found on Wikipedia about this too, is that people on the crew and Van Peebles were carrying heat, like loaded guns, because apparently he shot this without union movie people. And back in those days, the Teamsters would just send in a bunch of goons and just shut the set down.
Yeah,
So,
that
good.
sound guy, I think it was the sound guy, he was a union worker who had agreed to come in and help on the production, but everyone kept it a secret. And they even did like a production photo or something that he's in, and they blacked out his face
Wow.
so that no one would
So,
recognize him. Yeah.
so interestingly too, so Van Peebles is carrying some sort of pistol on him, I guess. And he's taking out his things at the end of the day, sets it down, and the prop person puts the loaded gun into the prop gun box.
Oh no.
So there was a possibility that they would have shot that gun with Beetle and it would have been a real slug in there. And it goes to the Alec Baldwin incident, which I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
how crazy is that?
Slightly different,
Well, I
case,
know,
because
but
on Alec Baldwin's film, you've got more professional like armorers and stuff like that. There's more of there's even less of an excuse in that situation, whereas the
well,
Van
sure,
Peebles thing, I
but I'm
can
just
see.
saying the same result could have happened.
Yes.
That a live round would have been shot into the guy's head, basically, because he had the gun right next to his ear.
Yeah.
You know,
But I mean,
so
to your questions about Beetle, I think that it's why did we have that conversation in that particular way? I think the point of the conversation was Beetle's helping Sweetback like get out of town, and also to say,
yeah,
I've got your back. I'm not going to sell you out to the man. You're my brother. And then that pays off later in the interrogation scene, because
right,
even as the cops are blowing, essentially making him deaf by, as you say, blowing the gun right, at his ears, and his ears are bleeding and he's like crying and stuff. He doesn't give in, never gives in. But that scene, it is so, again, it's kind of shocking because you're like, he's not really going to sit down and take a crap, is he? Oh yeah, he's doing that. You can hear it, and he
right.
flushes, he wipes and he
Wipes
flushes, and
himself, and
all of that stuff. I mean, you think back 10 years before this movie came out, it was a giant deal that Alfred Hitchcock showed a toilet in Psycho. This
right.
is another way for Melvin Van Peebles to say, yeah, here's what people do with the toilet. It's not just a set
Right.
decoration. So I
Well,
think, again, I think it speaks to the authenticity of like, yeah, people have conversations. Sometimes they're, in the bathroom. This is what happens. This isn't the sanitized stuff that Hollywood is trying to sell you. This is real life.
um, what was interesting, I've tried to watch this film several times, okay, over the years, because I was a fan of Van Peebles, and I, like I said, seen Watermelon Man earlier, and this was his. Not only was this his Citizen Kane, but it also was a movie that within film history made a huge difference, both in the independent scene, race pictures, et cetera, et cetera. So to watch it today was significant to me because I think at this point in my life was the best time to see it. You know, to your point that we're less of a racist society now. It's more underground, but also because of our enlightenment and my enlightenment over the years, I'm able to see the trees in the forest. And also, I don't think anybody in the audience in Detroit and Atlanta, where the film opened, cared that they were exploiting women or homosexuals. In fact, they were probably laughing along with the homosexual jokes, which included a man shining the shoe of a white man with his ass.
Yes.
Which was, again, another shocking scene. And I'm like, okay, is he making fun of gays again? I don't know. You know? So
I didn't get the impression that was like that was a gay thing.
Yeah, that's why I was questioning what does this, right? If it is I think it was mostly to show the exploitation. But since he had made fun of homosexuals earlier, I was like, who knows?
Well, but I mean, the thing is, the guy, the white guy who was having his shoes shined was kind of laughing, but so was the guy who was shining the shoes with his ass.
Right.
He wasn't like frowning, like the guy was like, I want you to shine my shoes with your ass, boy. It was none of that. It was almost like,
that's why there was a sexual context to it, in a sense.
I didn't see that as sexual though. I thought it was more of a play on like, you don't know shit from Shinola. You know?
That's a good point.
So, but yeah, it's just another kind of I felt like Van Peebles was kind of like tweaking the racist white element that he was taking shots at them throughout the whole film, rightfully so, but I felt like this is another moment like, this guy is such a dumbass. You think it's so cute that he's getting his shoes shined by this lower caste black guy that he doesn't even notice really that it's his he's getting his shoes shined with crap.
Maybe. But it was another odd scene in a very odd movie.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to bring up from this essay, and I'll just quickly read this. This is Leonard Bennett Jr. This is from Ebony magazine a few months after the film opened. He argued that the film romanticized the poverty and misery of the ghetto, and some men foolishly identify the black aesthetic with empty bellies and big-bottomed prostitutes. Bennett concludes that the film is neither revolutionary nor black because it presents the spectator with sterile daydreams and a superhero who is ahistorical, selfishly individualistic with no revolutionary program, who acts more out of panic and desperation. So it just is so interesting that we filter films through our own experiences and our own education.
Mm-hmm.
And he was doing a counterpoint to Huey B. Newton. And again, I'm not going to go into it because it's on Wiki and you should read it. But so a revolutionary sees the revolution. An intellectual sees the plight of this man, not so much in revolution, but in desperation and panic. So where does Sweetback lie on that scale between desperation and panic and revolutionary? Is he over the 50% mark? Is he, less, more? I mean, he was hungry and he was desperate and he was injured and he killed some dogs because of it.
Well, it's weird. I see Sweetback as a revolutionary figure, but I don't see him as a character as a revolutionary. He is someone who, through his circumstances, end up on the run, end up getting a lot of help from very disparate people. I mean, we haven't even talked about the white, Hell's Angels. It is kind of, it's almost like this weird sort of stereotype that Van Peebles dwells in with the, the sexuality of the black man's big old dick, just like getting him through everything and kind of
Oh,
like
there you go,
reducing him,
sir.
kind of
Put
like
it right out on
reducing
the
him to that.
table.
Right? Foomp, right? But no, it's as much of it as it is a symbol of his empowerment, because in a lot of scenes it gains him passage, whether it's the rites of passage of growing up in the beginning, to, it's the way he makes his living with the sex shows, to it's
Yeah,
the way he gets out of the Hells Angels killing him, because
very strange.
he sleeps with the female leader, I guess, or the person that they revere, and drives her to a bigger screaming orgasm than before. It's
I,
trading in this currency, but it's also reducing him to the stereotype of like the big swinging dick.
well, I'm thinking that maybe, not even maybe, I think Van Peebles was just kind of putting his story out there. Yes, thematically, it was about, Sweetback versus the man, thematically, but just the story elements have really nothing to do with that except to advance whatever plot this thing has. And he just was putting outrageous stuff in it. And the fact that, the Hell's Angel leader is a woman, and instead of knives, he's using his schlong. How outrageous is that?
Well,
Is that revolutionary? But in the sense of the historic stereotype of men, black men in their equipment.
well, I mean, he definitely walked softly and carried a big stick. But but that goes back to what I was saying about like Sweetback himself. He's surviving. He's going completely on instinct and like the relationships he builds along the way. So he doesn't have any great, and getting back to like the idea of, at the end he gets across the border and he's safe, and then it's like he's coming to get you. I don't think he's coming for anybody. I think he's just going to go try and survive in Mexico, or maybe when the heat dies down, I'll try and go back home. But in terms of being a revolutionary figure, like what he represents and what he might represent to the audience, of people seeing a version of themselves represented on screen as powerful figures who are standing up to an oppressive system, that's the revolutionary spirit that I'm getting from the film.
And I agree with that. It's kind of almost unfair to look at Sweetback as a character, because he doesn't really have the character elements of a real human being, except for maybe the fact that he gets hungry and thirsty in the desert. It, Again, it goes back to survival instincts. What are your survival instincts? Who and why and how are you surviving? Because historically, people of color have had to survive in a different way than the for lack of a better term, white leadership, white supremacist, white patriarchy. So that's part of the journey, his survival. And if he has to use his humongous tool to do that, I guess he does.
Yeah.
Which is damned outrageous, I have to say.
Yeah.
You're picking out this story and you're saying, okay, let's have Sweetback.
And that gets back to
like that, maybe you need some therapy. Okay.
Well, I mean, but that's why I think that's why Van Peebles has repeatedly described this as a porno movie.
Yeah.
It has all of the character development of that. Even if you step back and you really overanalyze the movie, if you look at, when he's on the run, why are so many people helping him? There's all these montages of like ostensibly the camera person is the cop pounding the beat, saying, have you seen Sweetback? I'm like, I ain't seen Sweetback. I don't know Sweetback, whatever. So there are all these people covering for him, but you never asked like, why? Does everybody know Sweetback just because he's black? Do they know him? And does anybody not like him? Would there be anybody to sell him out?
I think it goes back to his symbolic aspects rather than his character aspects.
Right.
This is we as a community, the black community, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is probably one of the most significant, weight that you can put on this film. That stars the black community. Sweetback is not, the only person here. He is part of the aesthetic and community and the racial elements of the time. and he is going to run away from it, and he's going to get help from the people who want him to run from it, much as, you know, runaway slaves were encouraged by, you know, their network.
Which does bring back, you know, the question of like, what, I don't know if there was a sequel or anything like anything ever happened with this character, but it's kind of like, if you do have a character who is kind of only out for themselves and surviving on instinct, when they get across the border to Mexico, what do you think he does? Does he come back and try and help people, or is he just going to try and go back and live his quiet life? And then the meta context of that is like, what is that saying about, if Van Peebles is trying to say something about his people, what is that saying about his people?
Well, you know, it's like, it's better that it doesn't have a sequel, because in a sense, you know, how do you bring the symbol back in to collect his dues? You know, what is that going to mean? If you make it literal, an act, a crime, or whatever, then you're taking away the power of that final statement as it stands symbolically. So, but, you know, again, it was a different time. In these times, we'd be saying, well, hell, there's going to be a sequel. I'm surprised there wasn't a credit sting.
Yes.
Sweetback's fist coming out of the, you know, the Mexico, the Rio Grande River.
Now I want to see that. Except that river was also filled with dog's blood. But
yes, yeah, well,
yikes.
This is another funny thing about censorship. It was censored in a lot of cities, you know, because
I think it had an X rating or something.
It did have an X rating. On the poster, he put "rated X" by an all-white jury. Exactly.
There you go.
You think there was a black person on the ratings board? No.
No, not in the 70s, and possibly not even today. I don't know. They keep all that stuff
the whole
secret.
History, right? Oh yeah. That's I've never seen that. Have you seen that documentary about them?
It was like 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, it was, but I've not seen it. And I have always had a curiosity about it. I should see if it's available somewhere.
I remember it being good, but it's kind of like, because there's an organization that's shrouded in secrecy and it's still shrouded in secrecy, you're kind of like, well, that was interesting, but, you know, I didn't get what I wanted to know. Like, who are these people?
Oh, yeah. But I think that's the point of the board, that they don't want that kind of, because then it becomes a political issue, that sort of thing. But the rating system is flawed. The rating system should go away. It simply should say, has material that sensitive people over 18 shouldn't see, and that's it. You know, do people still get mad about? I go to R-rated movies. I see kids in there all the time now.
Well,
I know if I went to an R-rated movie in the 70s or 80s, I'd never see a kid there. So who knows?
It depends. I definitely think there should be some kind of boundaries. Because I've got young kids, and sometimes
of course,
you know, even you know, like even looking at YouTube, which is pretty much the only quote unquote TV that they watch. You can have a YouTube kids channel of, like, you know, Lego building, you know, and there'll be all these kids like building Legos, and then in between videos they'll have an ad for a horror movie. Like, you know, a guy coming at you with a chainsaw, and if I'm in the next room, like, you know, making a snack or something, and I'm coming back, I'll have to like run to the TV and grab the remote, like skip, because it's not Coco Melon or Garfield or something.
Their algorithms, even though they have the kids filter on it, their algorithms still say, here's the ad you're going to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably because it's something like, it's probably something like, oh, this TV show is called Child's Play. It's probably okay for the kids channel, even though it's about a psychotic killer doll. It's just speculation, but.
So let me read this statement from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which I wonder how many black people are on their board. But Ann Wara, associate curator of the Department of Film, says, Sweetback's importance goes beyond the history of filmmaking, and that its impact on social consciousness, culture, and political discourse remains indisputable. Your reaction to that statement, sir?
It sounds like it was written by white people, but
Did I get you on that track? I apologize.
No, I mean, no, this is a whole other conversation, but the phrase George, one of my favorite phrases from George Carlin is "guilty white liberals." Can't stand them, but it just sounds like it. And as far as like, are there any members on the MoMA board? My first question is, are there any who were turned away, like Black applicants, because they were Black? How many Black people want to be on the MoMA board? If the answer is 5,000, then yeah, there's probably a problem. If they have zero applicants, then
I'm sure the board is much more racially diverse now.
Of course, yeah, it's 2021.
But you bring up the thing about guilty white liberals again. That's painting a large brush. Who are you conjuring up when you say guilty white liberals? I'm interested in that statement.
I mean, don't take any offense, Pat, but
I'm not taking any offense,
kind of you. I mean, you take on a whole lot of this kind of causes, and I sense a lot of like hesitancy and sort of guilt for past oppression and stuff. And I understand that, but I don't share any of it, because I don't feel that even my white ancestors, they may have done horrible things, but that doesn't reflect the way I look at the world. I treat everybody equally and with kindness and compassion and respect, and I think they should all have equal opportunities and rights. But there's like, don't you feel bad about this? Like, no, because I didn't have anything to do with it.
Well, I mean, again, I think you when you say you're viewing me as that, I it's not that I take offense to it. I'm just saying you're not looking at that circumstance correctly. Number one, I think it's more of an empathy thing. I feel the pain of human beings who have to deal with this on a daily basis and or a historical basis.
Right, but again, getting back to what I was saying earlier, you are also painting with a broad brush. The idea that when you see a Black person in the street, you're like, oh, I need to feel sympathy for what they're going through. You don't know what they're going through. They may have never had a racist incident, or if they had it, they might not think about it. They may not process it the same way. It's almost like a coddling, like I must feel bad because I have all this white privilege and there's all these POC around me that they have it so terribly. I'm like, that's just, I understand that. And I appreciate that people think to care enough about that. But I also think on a certain spiritual level, it's kind of condescending, because it robs them of the dignity of saying, do they walk around thinking, I really feel sorry for those white people because they're lame, that kind of thing. I don't know if they give as much thought. And when I say they, that sounds terrible. Like those people. I mean,
really, no. It's becoming convoluted because it assumes that you're taking a narrative that a certain group or a certain feeling that I have for somebody else, given encountering them on the street. That's not absolutely not true.
But what you just said, when you're talking about feeling empathy for Black people or people of color because of what they go through, I'm like, you don't know what large groups of people go through.
Empathy for the oppressed.
But that's that way. Okay. But are you saying that all Black people are oppressed?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, that's
there are
socioeconomic
levels that come into play. I'm simply saying historically, and to this day, we treat certain groups of people differently because of our perceptions of what that skin color or that gender or that orientation embodies.
Right, but you say we, and I'm not part of that we. So that's why I'm saying I draw a distinction between the way that you perhaps look at the world and the way that I do.
Of course. And it goes back to how we view films, for example, because we all have a different experience. We've all encountered things in our lives that have changed our worldview, and we watch our art through that worldview. But I just, the notion of people who are trying to be better human beings by trying to understand what other groups go through rather than dismissing and going behind your gated community and saying, I'll just pretend it doesn't exist.
But those are two extremes.
I know. I'm giving you the extreme examples. So I'm saying, where do we tolerate who? It's all up to your point of view. Mm-hmm. And to say, well, I'm a guilty white liberal, that's not true at all. I have no guilt whatsoever about my feelings about the racism and the history of the racism in this country. I just know it's fucking wrong, and it was wrong when it was happening back then, and it's wrong now, and that's it. Through my point of view, it's just wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
So
no
I'm not
argument there.
trying to. If that's guilt, then I'm guilty.
And we end with a stunning admission of guilt. No, no, but this.
I don't think, as you said, it's a conversation for another time.
Yeah,
if we're at the coffee shop and we're debating our political positions, I think it's great. But when I come on once a month and we're talking about a movie, and this is where we start debating our political structure.
Well, but no, but but it's good because this is the kind of conversation that Van Peebles was trying to spark, I think, with this movie, sure. And certainly with Watermelon Man in 1970.
Absolutely.
So the fact that we got here from talking about this movie, I think, is the exact point, and it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. You know, I still love you,
and I still love you too. And the thing is, I read that quote because social consciousness, culture, and political discourse remain indisputable. She is not saying that it's one point of view or the other. It's just saying that this conversation, the conversation that it engenders, remains indisputable. And if this podcast this vodcast doesn't prove that, I don't know what will. And I'll say one thing about George Carlin. When he started talking about politics, he ceased to be funny.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I would have to go back and try, because I always kind of like got his cultural stuff. Like his last stand-up special, I think, was unwatchable because he was just like angry and ranting.
Yeah, it's just he was. It's interesting at the end of his life. What was he looking for? He was seeking something, and he would do that seeking through his monologues. And in the end, you're like sitting there and going, okay, that was interesting, but am I here for a lecture, or am I here to hear some comedy? And the other day on the CBS morning show, they had this so-called clean comic on, that he was selling out houses because he's a clean comic. He's not talking politics. He's talking everyday life.
Airline food and stuff. Right?
Yes, the airline food comic. Yes, that's what we called the airline food comic.
Yeah.
But the fact that they have to, profile somebody like that, I said, I said, I can go on stand-up night in Chicago and see 50 of those guys. This guy happened to break through, and really stand-up is all about the luck of where you're at and who's watching you. And suddenly, you're on the gravy train to Showbizville. But I was just, in the media, I'm like, what's going on here? We have to point out that the guy's doing clean comedy. I think a lot of people are doing clean comedy or observational comedy or whatever. But,
I didn't see the piece, but yeah.
It would be, I think a good documentary would be on the changing mores of George Carlin and how he went from one point to another, and what were the revelations that came about that allowed him to go into these other realms. Because he had a lot of popularity at the end with his semi lecturous rants rather than his comedy. And he had a lot of people when he broke through. And he had so many phases in his career too.
Yeah.
He was the suit and tie comic that was on Steve Allen. He was the hippie comic during the 70s, and then he was the grumpy old man comic. I mean, it's just interesting to see his journey.
Well, even the grumpy old man comic had a couple of phases, because back in like the late 90s, he was the grumpy old man, like ranting about pop culture,
right?
And very much observational humor, through that lens. But then I think the Bush years kind of broke him or something, because, but it's strange because I met him. It was when, was it 2005, maybe, when his last book, When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chops, came out.
Right.
I met him
that title.
Yeah. I met him at a Barnes and Noble book signing. I'd grown up loving George Carlin. I was expecting this irascible, kind of like cranky old man, but he was just the nicest, like loving the crowd, like a congenial old man. It's not that I was disappointed. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Especially around, that might have either been right before or right after he started doing the stuff where I was like, this is just angry. This is not funny.
Yeah.
Where is this coming from? And I understand I think his wife had passed away, and that really kind of took a toll on him. But yeah, it was just kind of sad to see.
That's what I'm saying. A documentary on his journey would be very, very interesting.
There'll be one.
This is a sort of must-see historical film, I believe, after viewing it today, because there are so many circumstantial and situational elements of the time, and then going afterward, that is sort of in a centerpiece. Let's say 50 years before this film and 50 years after, and this is the center. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, indeed. And so traditionally in December we do a Christmas film. Are you up for that?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think
hopefully one that has racial and political themes, Pat.
Medea's Christmas it is.
No.
I've only seen one Medea movie, and the reason I saw it is on the radio show I was on, somebody, the host mentioned one, and I said, well, I've never seen one. I said, for you, I'm going to watch one this week, and I did. I watched, and I get it. I get in many ways the Medea films is just like this Van Peebles thing. It is creating an atmosphere about the culture that is familiar and allows this absurd character to go through it.
Well, and also, we could talk a lot about Tyler Perry. Was it the Oscars last year? I think he got some kind of a special award, but he went on this.
Hirschhold.
Yeah, and he there was a whole presentation about the compound he's building, and giving opportunities and workshops and classes, and building up the next generation of filmmakers, especially people of color. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I'm like, could all of the Oscars just be like this, please?
Well, also too, he was very, very instrumental in allowing that state to go blue because of his support of Stacey Abrams and the system that they created to go through the state and get the vote out.
Yeah.
But one of the most memorable times on this podcast was when we did the 1930s Christmas Carol.
Right.
So one of the things I'd like to do, we will have to decide right now, of course, but I'd like to see a Christmas film that I've never seen. And that's really getting harder and harder these days. In fact, I just put together the 4 films that my friend Ken and I, that we do every year for the holidays, are going to do. And of those, I've seen 2. Yeah, so it's two. We also don't do just film. We do some TV stuff too. So it's 2 TV things I've never seen and 2 films I've already seen. But those 2 films haven't been seen in a long, long time. So.
Well, have you ever seen Silent Night, Deadly Night? We could go the horror slasher route.
I'm not interested in that, unfortunately. But I am interested in Joyeux Noël. It was a French film of a couple years about a woman who has to tell her family she's dying around Christmas.
Oh, sounds great. Here's the thing.
I do have curiosity about Silent Night, Deadly Night, but not enough. I don't. In 2022, we'll do that. Because in 2021,
we'll do it in 2024 because I think that's the anniversary. But no, it's funny. Just really quick, it reminds me of there was that movie, The Family Stone, that came out like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
We went. My wife and I took my mom to go see it because it's like she had just been through, she was going through breast cancer at the
Oh
time.
no.
And we were like, okay, we're going to go see this, funny
Uh,
holiday film. And all of a sudden fucking
uh,
Diane Keaton shows up with breast cancer. My mom loses it in the middle of the
and
theater. I'm like,
also, it's all that dysfunctional energy in that film. I mean, a lot of people like it. A lot of people like it. So,
yeah,
you
I don't
know.
remember anything about it except just like looking at my mom, like losing her mind in the theater. It was fun.
Well,
Great time out of the
so,
movies.
come up with some suggestions for the Christmas film, and I'll come up with some suggestions,
Well, I'll
and
tell
we can
you, I,
figure
I
out
just want to
maybe.
hear your suggestions because anything that you find that you have not seen, there's nothing I won't watch.
Okay, deal.
That's my
Well,
pledge
that's
to
why
you.
there are things I haven't seen. The last year was the first year that Ken and I explored the Christmas romance, and it was so fascinating because I'm not going to waste my time in the Hallmark Channel watching those, a single guy for Christmas or, uh, you know, uh, so and all that, and yet this art form has been raised to another level now that Netflix is involved. They've got the new Home Alone movie. They've got they Rob Delaney is in it though. If Rob Delaney's in something, I'm telling you, I'm in. Have you ever seen Catastrophe, by the way?
No.
Oh, Christ. Dude, do yourself a favor and binge that series. It is just off the charts good. Off the charts good. Rob Delaney, Sharon Hogan, the British actress, and they both, after that series, kind of had some uptick, but they're kind of floating right now in the nether zone of, like, Sharon Horgan just did that pandemic comedy about staying with uh, her partner, her significant other through the pandemic.
Mm.
I forget the name of it, but it just came out a couple months ago. Tells you how much it impressed me because I've completely forgotten the name. So,
Well,
any
I'll
final
also,
words?
yes, all I'll say is that for you, Pat, and only you, I would watch the new Home Alone movie.
No, I won't
But
do that.
I pray that you don't choose that one. But yeah,
I
anything else?
I'll tell you though, what I am fascinated with is these straight-to-video sequels to some of the classic Christmas movies. There is a Home Alone sequel that's like Home Alone, and it's in the official canon. So it's like one, two, three, four, or something. It's four or five, but these are straight to DVD. So maybe that's another category we can explore. I mean,
Oh,
I've seen Ernest Saves Christmas. That's a classic. I'm sorry, that is a classic.
I've never seen
And
it.
and is it Santa with muscles? Yeah, I think it is.
Is
The
that the
the
Hulk
Hulk
Hogan
Hogan.
one?
That's a classic.
You do
One of
love your
Mila
Christmas
Kunis's
movies.
first roles.
Really?
Both of them are worth watching during the holidays. Don't do it close to the holiday, but did I tell you my Christmas story from last year?
No.
I had two weird Christmas stories in a row, um, but it has to do with Christmas Day coming at midnight. So this in 2019, I fell asleep on the couch about 10:30, just watching anything, and I had a very intense and very realistic dream about my brother trying to tell me something, um, and there were certain. It was like he was a astronaut in space talking to Houston, so I
Hmm.
was listening in on his conversation with this disembodied voice. And so anyway, very clear. I wrote it all down, so I'm not going to go into detail. But I woke up, and I swear to effing God, the church down the street, the bells were tolling for midnight at Christmas, and I said, the ghost did it all in one night. I was just like Scrooge. I was just like Scrooge. So the next year, even a weirder year because my dad's illness and I'm at home. I'm trying to help out, but my mother and I watched uh, White Christmas, the Bing Crosby movie, which is one of my favorites. And I said, "Oh, there's no way I'm going to get through this." You know what got me through it was they have one of those ultra high definition televisions, and of course it was on Netflix, so it was shown in HD, and I could see the detail in the background. It was like you could see the extras messing up. You could see them smoking and drinking and smoking and drinking. It was fantastic. The movie literally ends. The final credits come up. I look at my watch and it's midnight on Christmas. It's
Wow.
Christmas Day, the moment that movie ends. And when did we do? I actually think we stopped it, did something else, then came back to it. It wasn't like we were, okay, if I start it precisely at 10:40, it will end precisely at midnight. So anyway, I'm almost afraid of what's going to happen this year, because
Well, I mean,
it's been such a stupid, radical year for me, and I just I don't know.
well, if the last 2 years have been any indication, you're in for some kind of a
I
nice
know.
treat, because the
Yeah,
dream about your
both of them,
brother and
both
then
of
the
them.
White Christmas, those
Yeah,
are nice
those
coincidences.
they are gifts. They are
Yeah.
psychic gifts from the universe, and
Yeah. So especially
and
with the year that you've had, you're probably in
yeah.
for like a
Well,
real
that's what I'm
nice
saying. I'm
surprise.
a
Yes.
little afraid of Christmas Eve this year.
Oh, you'll be okay.
Thank you.
You can call me at midnight and tell me what weird shit happened. But so this is
while you're assembling some toy for your child.
Oh God. Probably. Well, so this has been our podcast allegedly about Sweetback's Badass Song.
I think a warning should be put on this. Please, sensitive human beings should not listen to this podcast.
Well, thank you very much for
you.
going through this crazy journey with me. I think if you look at your watch, it's going to be midnight on Christmas.
I also, yes. But I also believe, too, that this was the perfect film for our tenor of film journey together. I mean, the way that we've been going through the film journey together, this is exactly the type of film that we should be watching.
Yes.
So
it is the film we need right now.
For coming up with it. And yeah,
well, it all sprung from Watermelon Man, because when I found out that it was coming out on this Blu-ray, I'm like, damn it, we have what people should do. They should write into us and tell us what movie they've been dying to talk about that they can't find anywhere. We'll talk about it, and then magically it will come out on physical media.
It will occur into the marketplace. Exactly. Yes. So
all right, sir.
Yeah, okay. I thought of a Christmas thing that I'd always wanted to do, and I think it's available on YouTube, but I won't say it now. I'll let the listener wonder what's going to happen next month sometime. Hopefully we'll do it Christmas week. Who knows?
All right. Well,
I think we did the Scrooge. Again, one of my favorite podcasts, because we were in that coffee shop and somebody told us to shut up. Shut your goddamn mouth.
Yeah.
She was angry.
Yeah, that was a fun time. But
it was fun.
But I do miss doing podcasts in coffee shops. That was
something. There was that period. That was great.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna close this out. Thank you again, man. Take care, and we'll talk soon, but not soon enough.
Love.
Blessings, sir.
All right.